All right, welcome to PsiChat. How you doing tonight, Jen?
I'm hats on.
All right, hats on. Pandemic hair time. We always
Exactly.
have hats on. So, welcome to another episode of PsiChat. And tonight we are going to be talking with Mike Nichols. And he's an independent researcher, and he has been doing random number generator research in haunted locations. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to it tonight. So, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself? What got you interested in parapsychology and ghosts and hauntings, and kind of let us know why you do this stuff.
Yeah, that takes me back a long way into my childhood, I guess. Really, I'm from a little town in Missouri called Carrollton, Missouri, about 5,000 people. It was like growing up inside of a Ray Bradbury novel. And I had a grandmother that my mother's mom who grew up in the Ozarks, and for her, she was just full of ghost stories when I was growing up. And so and it was not like the folklore kind of ghost stories, but stories from her family of people who'd actually seen apparitions and had poltergeist experiences and so forth. And so that was really, normal conversational table talk for us as I was growing up. And she was one of the wisest women that I've ever known. And so I got interested in that at a very young age. But when I would go to school, grade school, and tell my little friends about, some of this ghost stuff, they were all like, there's no such things as ghosts. I don't believe it. There's got to, prove it. And that was a challenge to me. So I thought, well, if these things are real, there should be proof for it. And I was immediately going to the town library and asking for books on what I discovered was called parapsychology, and started reading on that stuff as soon as I was able. I got interested in the topic of technology and investigations at a very early age. In fact, I actually, in 8th grade, I wrote a letter to Fate magazine into their letters column asking,
Wow.
That's
cool.
This would have been in 1966. So that tells you how old I am. And so, and I got an answer in the letters column from Dr. Ian Stevenson at
wow. Nice.
Is it Virginia University at that time?
University of Virginia. Yep. Okay.
So
cool.
And he directed me to an article that had just been published in the American Society of Psychical Research's journal by Charles Tart, which addressed the topic of using instrumentation in the investigation of hauntings. And that was, I was off and running after I read that. I already was starting to investigate haunted houses around in high school and so forth. And at the time, I think that consisted mostly of breaking and entering and criminal trespass and some stuff I won't get into here. But,
we've all been there.
Yeah, that's how we all started. And I don't, recommend that approach anymore to anybody. We would actually take tape recorders, the first little, reel-to-reel 3-inch tapes into those houses and see if we could get anything. So it was a lot of fun. Then all through college, of course, I maintained my interest. I was very fortunate in coming into contact with a parapsychologist in Kansas City, Missouri, named Dr. Robert Ashby, and I became his research assistant, and I consider him my mentor, and got to co-write a book with him, and so did a lot of research for him, a lot of work for him, and even did some field investigations when people would call and say they had disturbances in their house. Bob would typically send me to do the interviews and investigations, so that was fun. And what else? Well, then in the 80s, I met a fellow who was the chairman of the psychology department at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, Dr. Larry Simpkins, and after some discussion, he decided that he wanted me to teach a class at UMKC in parapsychology, and I was delighted to do that. I don't, by this time I'd had a pretty good background in it in terms of its history, and I loved the history of the field and had read all the journals going way back to the founding of the Society for Psychic Research in 1882 and all their journals and proceedings and so forth. So even though I hadn't majored in that at the university, simply because there wasn't, they didn't offer a degree in that, but I did have my undergraduate degree. I had two majors, communications and psychology, and the psychology side of it I did specifically because I wanted to get into parapsychology. And so I took classes in research methods in psychology. I took classes in statistics, and every single paper I wrote for those 4 years was about parapsychology. And I even had one of my professors who was pretty antagonistic to the idea of parapsychology tell me that, your papers are going to have to be really spot on or you're going to flunk this class. And that was the guy who taught research methods. So yeah.
Who was that? Are you willing to say, or not so much?
The professor's name?
Yeah.
I think his name was David Wright. If I can,
W.R.
I'm guessing that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the name
Cool.
It comes to me, but I think that was his name.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah, I don't know if he's still there or not. I haven't had any, trek with him ever since that class. So anyway, what else? Well, getting back to UMKC. So then I started teaching this course at UMKC in the 80s, and it was offered as both you could take it for either graduate level credit or undergraduate level credit. And I typically had about 60 students or so enrolled per semester.
Nice.
So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Great. So that's how you got started. So tell us, what have you been doing in the field lately? I know you want to talk about your random number generator research at haunted locations. So just kind of give us a brief introduction to what you've been doing recently.
Well, recently, of course, not much because of the pandemic.
We're all there.
Yeah, I know. I've just been kind of waiting to get back out in the field again. But I got interested in working with random number generators back when computers first hit I'm talking about home computers first hit the market, and I went out and got a Commodore computer, which oddly enough had
the old Commodore 64.
I want to say late 80s, early 90s. Is that correct?
Commodore 64?
Well, no. I actually got Commodore VIC-20, but it was before.
Wow. So that's even earlier than that.
But interestingly enough, they shared one thing in common, and that was what they call their SID chip, which was a sound diode, which generated a white noise pattern or frequency. What do you call it? But it was a white noise generator, and of course they used it for the sound of spaceships exploding. But the interesting thing is that when you have a diode producing white noise like that, you have a source of hardware randomness, of true randomness. This is not something that is pseudo-random, that is created by a call to a random function within a programming language, but it's actually hardware generated. And I knew from my research in parapsychology that was what was needed for any decent research in the field of psychical research or parapsychology. I knew that Helmut Schmidt, of course, had developed a random number generator that was used for early experiments in randomizing targets for ESP and PK.
I think so. It wasn't some of his original stuff based on radioactive decay.
Yeah, strontium-90.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. And it would move a light around on this little dial. And if you were doing an ESP experiment, then the subject would try to predict which way the light was going to move around the dial. And if you were
Right.
PK experiment, the subject would try to influence the direction of the movement of the light. So you could approach it either way. And so I started like making little programs on my Commodore doing the same thing. It was just a matter of looking at the memory location, and it would of course come back with a number from 0 to 254. And so you would pull out whatever you wanted of that, and then of course you could mathematically manipulate that to whatever numbers you wanted to, but it would be true randomness. And actually that's kind of what inspired me to want to do this, taking something like that into a haunted house, or what is ostensibly a haunted house, a location that is purportedly haunted, because I wanted to see if there would be any correlation between times when the random number generator kind of went off the beam and started generating non-randomness, and at the same time that our researchers were having experiences which they interpreted as being paranormal in some way. Maybe somebody would, sense a cold spot, or see an apparition, or maybe there would be an object movement. And so, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if at the same time that happened to them, they had that experience, our random number generator suddenly went off the beam. And of course, a lot of that, the idea behind that was also influenced greatly by the Global Consciousness Project.
Right. So, Mike, can you like just generally go into what a random number generator is and how we're like perceiving that? Just because I don't think we talked on that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there are major kind of different kinds of them. There's what's called pseudo-random number generators, which are programs that computers run, and there's a function in a lot of programming languages which you make a call to the random function, but that is actually not true randomness, because if you seed the random number generator with the same value each time, it's going to constantly generate the same sequence of numbers. So it is predictable. That's not random. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
Consequently, you really have to have a hardware source of randomness to get TRNG, or true random number generation. So what we decided to do in this case is I was using a smartphone as a handheld computer, basically. And this is a principle that was actually developed by a scientist named Dr. Mads Haar. And it turns out that most smartphones are able to pick up atmospheric noise, which is just the background hiss, basically, of the universe. I mean, it's this, if you remember the days back when you had your FM car radio and you could tune between stations and you would hear a hissing noise, that's what you were listening to, was atmospheric noise. And as long as you didn't turn to a frequency where there was a strong broadcast signal, which would eclipse that background noise, then you got that hiss, that white noise. And the smartphone is able to pick that up and translate that, just like my old Commodore 64 or VIC-20. It translates that white noise into numbers, and you can use those numbers then. In my case, I pared it down to just binary zeros and ones, and I made it go through essentially like 100 coin tosses. And if you toss a fair coin, 100 times, you would expect to get, by chance, about 50 heads and 50 tails. And depending on how far it deviates from that, that's where you get into your area of non-randomness. So we set a threshold for this program. If it got past a certain level of randomness, then it would basically trigger an alarm. It would flash up on our screen, that there has been an RNG or REG event. It would tell us exactly how many zeros and exactly how many ones it got during that run of 100 coin tosses. And it would do an internal recording of that. And then we would also, during the investigation, we would also manually record that into the investigation log. So that would be a confirmation and a backup of it as well.
Okay.
So, that's cool.
Does that make sense in terms of the explanation of what it does? So, yeah. And
sure.
what we had is occasions where it went significantly off the beam and gave us.
So what do you consider significantly off?
Well, for the threshold, let me see. I've got to check my notes here to see what we did here. You would think I would have prepared this a little better. Hang on.
Take your time. It's okay.
Okay.
No worries.
You're gonna have to do a lot of editing on this turkey.
That's fine.
Okay. Proceed.
So let me see while you're looking that up if I can share a screen here. And here is an example. I found this a while ago, and it kind of shows you how the whole coin flip works. It's basically what you're talking about. It's like flipping a coin, but you're using so many coins, and they're flipping so many times per second. And you can see here, if we have 8 coins and there's equal probability of heads and tails, and I have it set to do 10 flips every run, and it just keeps running, and you kind of see what happens. So this is very similar to kind of the data, the concept of a random number generator.
David, are you showing something on screen?
I'm trying to.
It's not projecting. Just wanted to know.
Well, let me see if it'll actually work here. If not, that's okay. Mike will be ready to go in a second here. So there we go. Can you see it now?
Yes. There you go.
Okay.
Good.
Oh, I can see it too. Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
So what it's doing is it's showing how if you took these 8 coins and you did 10 flips each time, and it just keeps running, you're seeing that if you got an equal number of heads or tails, that's where the 4 would be. And then sometimes you get more or less, and you get a nice bell-shaped normal distribution curve eventually. So this is kind of an example similar to what Mike was describing on at least a very basic level of how an RNG works.
Okay, so explain it one more time that these are heads and tails, right? For people
I know. I probably didn't explain that well. That's the phase. I'm like, oh, I probably explained that horribly.
Well, we were having an issue with the digital FaceTime.
Okay, so let me start over again. Then let me just reset it. So I'm gonna stop it, hit reset. So let's say we have 8 coins here.
Okay.
And we're going to have them flip 10 times every time it does a run. So this is kind of what Mike's talking about. It's ones or zeros, heads or tails on the random number generator, right?
Yep.
So if you hit run, every time it does that, you see that you get this distribution where it's showing you how many heads and tails there are and what the split is. So you would assume eventually if it's totally random, you're going to get an equal number of heads or tails, but you're going to get some more heads sometimes, some less heads sometimes, and you get a distribution curve. So normally you would see a nice distribution curve. So in the random number generators, when you run a lot of these, you're going to see differences in that. You won't get just 4 heads and 4 tails overall, or it'll deviate a little bit from this bell-shaped curved. Okay, so I just want to kind of give a quick background because I think to me that at least it's a nice visual of how it's kind of running on the random number generator.
No, that helps a lot. Thanks.
Okay, sorry, Mike.
Oh, no, that's okay. And I did find the reference I was looking for. So in any given run of 100 coin flips, where we said there would typically, by average, you would think there would be 50 heads or 50 tails. If we saw a deviation of over 15, either plus or minus, in other words, we had more 15 plus 50. Okay, so that'd be 65, more than 65 heads in a single run, or more than 65 tails in a single run. We would consider that good enough for our threshold. And when you run the program, it actually asks you to enter what kind of deviation you are looking for. So we enter the number 15, and that gives a p-value. Do I want to get into this?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that gives a p-value of 0.000458 something, blah blah. So so that we can, that typically would give us an average of a little over 1.5 anomalous events on the RNG per hour. And what we wanted to see, because we know we're going to get some moments of anomalous output on the RNG. That's just going to happen by chance. But what we were looking for was to see if those moments corresponded with the same moments that our researchers were reporting things happening to them.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that I know other people have done RNG work in haunted locations. So how is this different? How are you improving on it? That'd just be one quick question for you.
From my understanding, and you know about this too, Dave, so if I misstate this, jump in there and correct me. But most random number generating experiments, I think, in haunted locations have been a matter of taking a random number generator into the location and letting it run. And then coming back later, the next day or whatever, and collecting it and seeing, what the cumulative deviation was from the mean. So how far, in other words, did the random numbers stray from randomness? And they would a lot of times then take the same random number generator and put it in a quote non-haunted house or a control, and see what the random number generator did there. Well, what we would be looking for, of course, is to say, oh, well, yes, there was a much greater deviation in a quote haunted house than a quote non-haunted house.
Okay.
But what I was looking for again was to see if there was, we were looking, instead of a cumulative deviation, we were constantly taking our system back to the baseline and starting from zero again and doing another 100 coin flips, or another run of 100 binary numbers. And we would do that over and over and over and over again, so we could analyze what we were doing in much smaller increments of time. And that allowed us to compare, did that anomalous reading from our RNG happen at the same moment in time, or very close in time to when our researcher reported seeing an apparition or seeing a shadow figure or whatever. And in the end, that's what we were looking at analyzing. It was the correlation between those two variables, which in the published work, it's work that's about to be published, hopefully. It's been accepted for publication. I call it an RNG event, or REG, random event generator, same thing. REG event and a paranormal event. Do those two variables correspond to one another, or relate to one another, link up to one another more times than chance alone could account for? Because I know every now and then, they're, just by chance, they're going to happen at the same time. But we're going to look at the entire night's investigation and see exactly how many times did that happen, and what was the chance that they would occur together over and over and over. And that's where we got some surprising results.
So what were the results?
Okay.
Money question.
Money question. Okay. We did our first investigation at the Beatty Mansion, which is a known house that's reputedly haunted. It is in Atchison, Kansas, and it has a lot of history of people having strange, I'm sorry, I meant to say it's in St. Joseph, Missouri. And it has a reputation of having a lot of paranormal activity. And when we got to that and did the investigation, we had a correlation that came down to a p-value of less than, well, and should I maybe I better back up and say what is commonly used for what is commonly considered statistically significant in a lot of areas of science would be a p-value of 0.05 or odds of 20 to 1 against chance, basically. And that's that's a standard used by science in places like pharmaceutical trials and clinical tests and so forth. But what we got, and can I out you here at this point, Dave? Because you were the one that did the.
I never want to hear that.
Out him.
Oh yeah, I guess out me. I guess.
Go ahead. I guess I better, because I wanted somebody to do an independent evaluation of our statistics on this, and I asked Dave if he would run this for me, and he sure did. And when he called me back with the results, I was completely blown away, because the p-value that we got on our first time out at the Beatty Mansion was not just 0.05, which in itself would have been significant, but and understand that the lower the p-value, the more significant it is, or at least in my mind. We got a p-value of 0.00001.
Okay.
Which is a very, 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 very small percent. That if this was due to chance, you would see something that much of a difference or bigger. So that's how small of a chance that is.
Right.
If you're going to accept, or if you're going to, let's say, the null hypothesis, which is there's no difference. If you were going to say there is no difference, that's the percent chance that could happen. And it's just so small, it's really statistically almost impossible for that to happen by chance. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, in terms of the way a gambler would look at it, this is 100,000 to 1 against chance result.
I'll take those odds.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and I know, Dave, you've talked about the fact that some statisticians are now saying that it doesn't matter how small the p-value gets. It's more of a question of just, does it get past the alpha of 0.05? If it does, it's significant. If it doesn't, it's not. But
it's significant. I mean, you've repeated it, though. It's not just one place. You've repeated it in 2 other runs.
Yes, we have. And
okay, so
I've done a lot of thinking about that since you said that. And first of all, there's this disclaimer. Having taken statistics in college and done a little bit work with them since then, I know that statistics is probably the most counterintuitive area of statistics. Probability statistics, I should say, is the most counterintuitive area of statistics you can possibly get into.
And according to Jen, nothing kills a podcast more than talking about statistics.
Oh, okay.
There's a high probability of talking about statistics. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
No, it does. It actually does.
Well, it's Mike's point that it's not a very.
It's not a sexy topic. It's just not.
But
it's necessary.
Let me just put it this way: if there wasn't a difference as those p-values got smaller, then I don't see how a straight flush would ever beat a full house.
Right. Hard. Yeah, it's definitely
true.
Difficult.
Right. But this is what real research is.
Yeah.
This is what you have to do, and these are the type of things and analysis you have to do to prove what you found is truly meaningful.
Right.
Right.
It's boring, but it's, well, not for me.
It is. I mean, for the general public,
Mike and I love it.
I love it too, but I also can see the other side of things where it is, it's a dry topic. It's very dry, and it's very hard to understand if you're not in the now of it. So I think it's up to us as these researchers to get the information, analyze it, and present it in a way that it's really informational.
Well, let me just,
yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'll go ahead and push through the other two experiments that we did then and try to get the statistics behind us so we can go on and talk about more interesting stuff. But we actually did replications of the same experiment at the Garnett House in Garnett, Kansas, and then at the McIntyre Villa in Atchison, Kansas. At the Garnett House, we got a p-value of 0.000081. And at the McIntyre Villa, we got a p-value of 0.0001. Those are all extremely respectable results. So we ranged all the way from 100,000 to 1 against chance to 10,000 to 1 against chance. So I'm,
and I gotta tell you, Mike, when you asked me to first analyze it, I thought, okay, there's not going to be anything to this. So I went into with a bias of there's nothing to this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not motivated to find a significant effect. So when I found it, I'm like, ooh, that's interesting.
There's something.
And then 2 more times, I'm like, ooh, wow, Mike, this is really interesting.
Yeah, they say that in science, really important discoveries are not proclaimed with the word eureka, but they're proclaimed by the word, that's odd.
I like that. That's
yeah.
I think my personal mumbling was, holy wow. It was pretty interesting.
When you called me on the phone and told me what your results had been, that was exactly my response. I walked around a bit in a daze for a week at least, because I just couldn't believe that not only had we gotten results, but we'd gotten such extreme, phenomenal results. So yeah.
So great. Well, yeah, it's really exciting, and I hope you continue and collect more data, because everybody needs more data, and that's what is needed in the field. So I guess I'd like to move on and ask, why do you think there's deviations in randomness? Why do you think in certain locations that may have paranormal activity or ghostly activity or reports of ghosts and hauntings, why do they deviate?
That's a great question. And, at this point, all I can do is speculate, because what we've got here, like I said, we've got 2 variables. We've got the RNG on the one hand, and we've got the experiences people are having on the other hand. Why do they seem to connect up? Because we don't have, it begs the question, what could possibly be the vehicle of making these 2 things happen together like that? Anybody who knows science knows that the old saying that correlation does not equate to causation. So it may not be that, first of all, I can't imagine that the RNG would be causing our experimenters to have experiences, but it may also not be that our experimenters are having experiences and then that's causing the RNG to respond. I tend to think more in terms of non-causal relationships between them, that they are correlated in an acausal way, which I know gets very into things like Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity, Paul Kammerer's idea of seriality, that things happen in series, that because there's something about these 2 variables that are similar in symbolism or similar in meaning,
right,
that they tend to cluster together, as Kammerer would say.
Causality?
They cluster together in both time and space. And that was the basis of Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity, of course. And Paul Kammerer was working on the very same idea at about the same time that Carl Jung was working on synchronicity, oddly enough, at about the same time, although they weren't aware of each other's work. And it's almost ironic that's another example of things clustering together in space and time. To me, the thing that the 2 things have in common are the very fact that they are so improbable. When an RNG goes off the beam like that and starts generating non-randomness, that's by definition not a very probable event. And at the same time, people having paranormal experiences, and I don't mean, that people don't have them. Obviously, people have them all over the world every day. But any given person on any given night is not going to. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen a ghost. I actually have never seen a ghost. Most people don't have these things happen to them all just every day. So they're intrinsically improbable. And that has led me to talk about, and brace yourselves, this is really a metaphor, but I'd like to, in my own mind, I kind of think of what's going on in a haunted house as something is generating an improbability field.
Okay.
I don't know if, now obviously
I would agree with that. I mean,
probability is something that is simply a mathematical expression of the likelihood of a certain event to occur or not to occur. So I don't know whether we can talk about that as a field or not, but it always reminded me of William Roll and some of his work. He was one of the great investigators when it came to poltergeists. And he often talked about a psi field that would be active in a haunted location or a disturbed house or whatever, and where these disturbances are occurring. And I don't know if my idea of a probability field is the same as his idea of a psi field or not, but I think they might have some similarity, some resonance with one another. And that's just, I mean, I know I'm way out on a limb here.
No.
And hard-nosed scientists are going to go, yeah, right. But I guess I'm saying that I'm willing at this point to accept that we really don't know what causes that non-causal relationship to exist, and I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I think we all are.
For example, I don't know if when one of my researchers sees a ghost or sees an apparition, I don't know if there's really an apparition there or whether that's something that's happening in my researcher's mind. But the fact is, whether it is a ghost that's really there in space or whether it's just happening in their own head, it nevertheless is still corresponding to the RNG output.
Right.
So what? Yeah, it can be that. Yes.
There's a correlation.
There is.
And you still need more data, and we all need more data to confirm that correlation.
Right.
And then you start thinking causation, and if you can come up with some ideas for causation, then you can take the testing a little bit further.
Right.
So I guess the next question is, what are you going to do from this point forward? What's next?
Another question. Are you for or against synchronicity? Another question.
Well, I've been kind of convinced by not only Carl Jung but also the work of Paul Kammerer. And if you don't know his work, he was a biologist who it was a tragic life. Probably the best book ever written about his life was written by Arthur Koestler, who is a kind of a historian of science, and it was a book called The Case of the Midwife Toad. And in the back of that book, it's all about his work in biology, but in the back of that book, there is an appendix that deals with his laws of seriality. And he probably went much deeper than even Carl Jung did on this idea of an acausal connecting principle, which he felt was a law of the universe as much as gravity or anything else that we experience all the time, and we always go, oh, isn't that a strange coincidence? And those are just the ones we notice. He goes on to say that probably there are coincidences happening all the time that we don't notice. The ones we notice is just the tip of the iceberg. So he feels that this is an actual law of nature that causes things.
So is the ones that we notice though? Is that Carl Jung's idea that it has to be meaningful?
Well,
so you wouldn't notice it unless it's meaningful to you.
Well, that would be true, and those are the ones that we notice. But according to Kammerer, the laws of seriality mean that events that are similar in meaning, whether you observe them or not, tend to cluster together in time and in space. So, and like I started to say, Jen, I think his work on this has convinced me more of it than even Carl Jung's work has.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the ultimate answer to the question of what's going on here or not.
Whatever you think, that's the whole.
but one thing I have noticed, and I should point out that in these investigations, and we were always looking for the two events to occur within 3 minutes of each other. Sometimes the researcher reports an experience first, and then we get an RNG hit. And sometimes the RNG hit comes first, and then the researcher calls in an experience that they're having to our post. So,
I love that.
Again, it pulls, typically causality is the arrow of causality is supposed to be only pointing one direction. If this is true, then it brings into question, well, how could one be causing the other if they're constantly flipping back and forth? And they are.
Yeah.
But one of the things that it might indicate is that, if these two things are constantly happening in tandem, perhaps you could use the RNG as a tool to predict when a paranormal event is about to happen.
I like that. That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Theory.
Yeah. If you can define a more precise p-value or z-score, and maybe tighten up your the window, because you use 3 minutes, but if you can tighten that up and have a particular score, then the predictive value of that's going to get only better if that's what's going to happen, if that's possible.
Yeah, I would.
Or maybe it's not. Who knows? We don't know yet. I mean, it could be predictive. It might not be. It might just be that these two things happen, and you're affected as an investigator, and the RNG is impacted in some way. But I mean, there's a lot of work that you'll still be doing, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. And to me, we're off to a flying start. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of possibilities down the road that we can explore. We still can't rule out certain things, like the possibility of experimenter effect. That's always there with parapsychology. I don't know any way to obviate that argument fully theoretically.
I'm sorry, Mike. Did you say observer effect or
experimenter effect?
Experimenter effect. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. The idea that it may be me as the experimenter. And by the way, I want to also do a shout out to the people who have worked with me on this the whole way through, and that's the PRI and Dan Williams out of Ottawa, Illinois, who they've been the main research team on all of this research that I've done so far. They are the ones that have been collecting the data and recording all of the reports of paranormal activity on a minute by minute basis as we do these experiments.
So Mike, I have to ask, so being that, that's what you had thought with the last question I asked about the observer effect, is there any difference between that?
Between the observer effect and the experimenter effect?
Yes.
Well, I think parapsychologists typically think of the observer effect of being more that like me the experimenter effect of being like more like me as the experimenter. I'm looking for this particular result and I'm hoping for it. could it possibly be that I'm using my own psychic ability somehow, some way to influence? Maybe I'm influencing the REG or RNG. I don't know really how that would be possible.
Okay.
On a technical level, but maybe I'm telepathically influencing the researcher in the next room to see a ghost. I don't know.
Well, what about
But
the fact that, just observing something is creating a different effect? Just by the possibility of observing something, you're creating a whole new environment for that to proceed. I mean, I know a lot of people think that the observer effect is causation. I mean, over observation. So I'm just curious about that. Am I right here, Dave, or am I like all over the place?
No. But I think it just depends on what you're talking about with the experiment.
I think
the observation effect is more or less that the act of observing something changes the outcome.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of, you're getting into quantum physics type stuff where you have the wave collapse and all that type of stuff, which we don't know if it works on the macro level. But parapsychologists, some others, have said that when they seem to observe certain phenomena, it starts to fade. And there's actually, I think I shared a paper with Mike at one point that they're seeing this with certain types of PK and ESP experiments, where when you observe it and you find a way to quantify it, it starts to disappear. So it's like it almost goes away. And then if you find another way to analyze it or observe it, it kind of pops back up and then it goes away again. So that's kind of the observer, that could be the potential observer effect. And then the experimenter effect is what Mike talked about. But it also could be a psychological thing where, Mike, I'm not saying this happens, this is just an example, Mike. So you would go into a location like you have and you would tell your team, I'm running this random number generator, and I expect, based on prior results, for you to have experiences that correlate with it. So you've set this expectation as the experimenter for them to have all these experiences. So you could have primed them, and they could be reporting a whole bunch of experiences, and the RNG is still randomly popping. So that's why it's so important to control your environment and control what you tell people and you don't tell people. So, I mean, they can be, and when you look at the literature in parapsychology, a lot of times the experimenter effect and the observer effect, they're interchanged, especially when it comes to random number generators, because they think the experimenter could somehow be influencing it because they know what the outcome they want. So they're affecting the experiment and the RNG, but the observers could be doing it too.
Yeah, but it's all by PK. It's not.
They don't know that. They don't know that.
It's not all about saying, this is happening. It could be PK or RSPK. I mean, I'm just saying it's not necessarily, known to one or the other.
No, they don't know.
Time. Right.
They don't know if it's a actual, you're influencing the something, or you is influencing the random number generator. So a PK effect. But they also think there's a way to do the analysis, and you can do it, and depending on the outcome, it'll either show if it's kind of a PK effect, or where it's this psi-mediated instrumental response, or basically what happens is you are somehow using ESP to pick a time to run the experiment that would show non-randomness. It's still all random, but you just happen to pick on something that tells you to pick a time to run the experiment. There's actually a pretty interesting way of telling which is which. In some authors have analyzed the RNG data and said it's PK, and other ones have analyzed other data and says no. It's this fact that you're picking a time period that's when it's going to be random or not random anymore. So you get back to this, is it PK or is it ESP? Nobody knows. That's the problem. Nobody knows, which I got to admit, that's where the skeptics have a field day, because it's like, okay, well, what's your theoretical model for this? And you got to come back and say, well, we're not sure.
Exactly.
I'm not sure it could be one of 20 different things.
And like I said, I think that argument is one that is maybe impossible to theoretically obviate entirely. We may just have to be content to rest with it at this level. If anybody can come up with experimental designs that do obviate it, I would be very, very interested in finding that out.
Yeah, it's tough, and there's obviously people a lot smarter than me working on it, and some of their papers are pretty interesting, but sometimes the math gets way over my head. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna have to take the word for it. That's fine. So
trying to make it make sense, I guess.
As far as we talked about the observer effect a little bit. I think Dean Radin has done some work in parapsychology where he has had subjects actually do observation of the classic experiment in quantum mechanics, where they do the double slit experiment, and people who are like clairvoyantly trying to observe what's going on at that level actually cause a collapse in the waveform.
Yeah, they're basically just thinking about it and causing it, which is interesting.
I know. To me, when I read that, I talk about mind blown, total mind blown.
No.
Interesting stuff. So
yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're coming up on our time frame here to finish up the show. So, Mike, thanks for joining us and explaining some of the exciting research you're doing.
Oh,
and do you have anything besides trying to ride out COVID-19 and staying safe and healthy, which we hope you do? Do you have anything coming up? Or if not, where can people find you and get more information about you and what you're doing?
Well, of course, you can always check out PRI, the group that I've been working with, that's out of Ottawa, Illinois, under the direction of Dan Williams. And you can also get a hold of me. I'm on Facebook. That's probably the easiest place for anybody to find me most of the time. And I know there's more than one Mike Nichols there, so look for a profile picture of a guy with white hair holding a guitar, because that will be me. That's one of the other hats that I wear, so is music. So and of course Dave knows all about this too, so he's been involved in the analysis of the 3 experiments I talked about tonight. So
great.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Mike, and we'll hopefully talk to you again soon in the future and get an update on any new exciting results that you have.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been
all right. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.